You can shovel snow in the winter, but you can't shovel snow in the summer. So they would hire extra workers to shovel the snow off the railroad in the winter time, but then they would lose that group of employees. In the summertime, you needed people to repair the rails, and you needed people to cut more ties, and so there was those types of jobs available, but the mines weren't operating. There were three things that were needed. You needed wood, you needed coal, and you needed people. The thing that was in the most scarce commodity was people. So you had to recruit people from all over the world to come to a place that they'd never lived in. For those of you that have lived at a high elevation your whole life, it's not much of a problem for you to understand it. But if you get off a train and you haven't adapted to it, it's better to get off a train than it is in the other way than flying. They hadn't adapted to it, it was very difficult for them to adapt to it. The other thing that was hard for people to adapt to was the amount of wind. I'm going to ask a serious question here. How many in here, I'm assuming most of you are from Wyoming, how many in here are bothered by the wind? Raise your hand, be honest.
We just live with it.
Exactly. Okay, so if this gets up running, I'll show you later, but even if it doesn't, I'll talk to you about it. We worked in Mongolia, and being the person that came from Evanston, Chinatown, and worked along the railroad here, I studied their railroad construction. And I had crews of Mongolians. Now, my Mongolian sucks. It's really, really bad. I can say "ni hao," which is hello. That's Chinese. I can say other words like "stand by no, how are you?" But I cannot speak Mongolian. When we were out working, it was me and the Mongolians, and they were whistling. And I says, "Why are you whistling?" And finally, I got somebody that could translate it to me. They said, "To attract the wind." I says, "You want the wind to blow?" I says, "What is wrong with you?" I didn't say that. I didn't understand it anyway. But the reason that they want the wind is it clears the air, it drives out the insects, and it actually purifies them. And they say that the wind enfolds you. And they have a different view of life. That when you die, you go to the big blue sky, you go to the great blue. All of us go because we're water. Water vapor goes to the sky. We all go to the great blue when we die. The concept of wind, the concept of cold, the concept of dry, the concept of dust are things that we have learned to adjust and adapt to. But people coming to here didn't quite have that adjustment skill. So when they came to work for the railroad, a lot of them couldn't wait to leave. They wanted to find another job. We all wanted jobs that paid more. They wanted to get another job that paid more, that was more stable. Because what I just described, if you worked in the mines, it was primarily a winter job. If you worked on the railroads, it was a primary summer job, unless you're shoveling snow. How long can you shovel snow and not want to find another job? No, I'm going to digress. We have 8-foot drifts in our driveway at home sometimes. And I tell my wife, I say, there's got to be some wisdom in going to Hawaii. I have children in Hawaii. Why shovel snow? Well, it comes to people's minds after they've lived in the harsh conditions that they need to move on. So there was a constant need to refill or rehire or find new people to fill the jobs because people didn't stay with them. The jobs were unstable, the jobs were low paying, the environment was pretty bad, but yet people stuck. And that to me is one of the things that I began to study the most in all my years is why people stuck here. Why did people stay? I admire stick-to-it. I admire people that stayed with it. Fast forward, we're going back to section camps in a moment. Fast forward, Sisson and Wallace was the company that hired the Chinese for the Central Pacific Railroad. When the railroad was joined in May of 1869, Sisson and Wallace began to expand their operations into Wyoming. They opened up offices in Ogden, they opened up offices here in Evanston, they opened offices up in Albany. And Sisson and Wallace had a man that was there, Sisson, who was great friends with a man called Assay. Do all of you know who Assay is? Well, Assay was a Chinese headman who was a person that had access to relatives in southern China that recruited those miners to come here. It says in one newspaper article that he was over 2,500 people. He wasn't over 2,500 people. He had 2,500 people that he brought in for Sisson and Wallace to move around and work. He would tell them where their work assignment was. But going back to this, when the railroad was built, they needed to find more workers, and so Sisson and Wallace recruited from the Chinese labor pool. The other people that they recruited from were Irishmen. But the Irishmen were on to different things. They wanted to find more employment elsewhere. They wanted to find other jobs that they could do and that they could be successful with. They were very good at moving on and finding other jobs. Irishmen built the rails primarily from Cheyenne to here, but then they didn't want to stay and repair them. They didn't also want to work in the mines. So going back to where I wanted to start with this, they came here to get a job that was temporary and didn't want to stay. Whereas some of the people came to the conclusion that it was better to stay here and do whatever you could to stay and work and stick it out and survive. Those people that were recruited in 1869 and specifically in 1874, some of those Chinese men stayed in Rock Springs until 1925 when they went back home to retire. Why did they stay? What made them stick? What made them like this place? What made Wyoming this place that people would stick through everything, including being in the Chinese massacre and including being driven out of Almy and having to find work elsewhere? What would make those people stick? Well, move beyond that to the next group of people that came. The Union Pacific was always short of individuals that wanted to work in hard conditions and labor under tough conditions. My family's a workaday world family. When I went to college, the thing that I thought about was what can I do to make money to pay the bills? Because technically school loans ain't gonna make it, I have to pay them back, right? It's not gonna make it. So I went to work in construction because that's what my family went to work in. And like these people that went to work in the coal mines, they had to deal with things that come with coal, working in the coal fields. If you were in the coal mines for 1 month, you had black lung. People in the industry don't like to admit that, but black lung is endemic to working in the coal mines. I've talked to a lot of the survivors of it. One of my best friends was Joe Vosvich, who was a Slovenian, who was born in Cumberland. His people immigrated from Slovenia to Cumberland, and they worked there. He had one lung removed. That one lung was removed very young in his life, and he exercised through the rest of his life to keep going. Those people that came and worked in these mines were workaday people, and I understand what it is to work. My brother, wise man that he is, put me to work at the Craig Power Plant between my undergraduate and my graduate school because of the fact that there was money to be made. You could make $200 a month. That's a lot of money, right? Now I'm going to digress one more time, but I have to get back on track on this $200. You remind me about $200. Okay, when I joined the Navy, they gave us $90 a month, and I wasn't joined because I wanted to. I joined to avoid the draft. I thought, well, I won't go to Vietnam if I do this, and they did not live up to my wishes. They sent me over there twice, and to the Persian Gulf to boot on that. We went to the Persian Gulf in '73. So $200 a month wasn't too bad for me. I thought, well, I'm doing good. But then I found out about the winter layoffs, and I was the low man on the totem pole, and I got laid off. And then I had to go out and sweep snow off of the scaffolds for less money than $200 a month. When I was a helper, it was there. But the reason I bring this up about the coal is we worked in asbestos. And we have issues when we do a historical archaeology of finding asbestos sheets or asbestos cloth when we're doing excavations that require mitigation so that we can continue to do our excavations. People in that day and age did not know that they were getting black lung, just like I didn't know that I was being contaminated by asbestos because the fact that asbestos was still legal. I was just doing a summer job so I could pay my bills when I went back to school. People that worked in those days did not know that the very thing that was paying their bills was going to kill them. The other thing is the dust. I brought the dust up a little bit earlier because of the fact that it created a situation where the dust will get in your lungs and you will get the same kind of problems that you've got that are in the coal mine. Does anybody in here know what causes black lung? Does anybody in here know?
Just gets in your lungs.
What'd you say?
The coal dust just gets in your lungs?
It's the coal dust is carbon in base, but I'm not dismissing that part of it because the coal is the problem. Does anybody know what it is that gets you?
Silica.
Where we sit in?
Silica.
Yes, it is. Precisely, it's a silicate. So that when you drill in and run your machines in there, it stirs up all of that sand and it gets in it. That's the same thing that you get in archaeology when you're shifting your screen and that silicate gets in your lungs. Or you're working in a cave and we excavated this cave from 2007 to 2019 when it was in a dusty cave and dust was there. It gets in your lungs and you have those problems with your lungs later on. Well, the people that were working here in the coal mine aren't stupid. I've always told people that the smartest people I ever worked with were the people as I was working on my construction site. Why do I consider them the smartest people? When I had a piece of plywood ready to fly out of my hand, somebody helped me. When I had a thing that needed to be lifted, I had somebody help me. They might not like me. but they help you. And the cooperation that you have to build something, that you have to do to open a mine, that you have to be able to get something done is given feet inside a construction site. Now, I'm just staying with this because, in fact, we're going to talk about section camps in what had to be done at the section camp through the year. In the case of the dust that was coming and permanent there, in the case that it was covering your dishes and places where it was covering your floors, it bothered you the whole time. One of my best friends, well, she might not think Barbara Smith, might not think that I'm her best friend, but I like her. She's our poet laureate. Wrote a poem about people in the boom. And she said they lived in trailers to the east of Rock Springs, and in through the windows came the same dust that people found in their homesteads. It came and it covered the plates and it covered their tables, and that dust was everywhere. That dust gets in your lungs, and that silicates do damage to you. Now don't move out of Evanston because of that. You guys have already put grass enough around. It's no problem. Kind of have to lighten it up a little bit there. But in the case of the coal mines, when they were hired by Sisson and Wallace, and ultimately bought out by Beckwith and Quinn. Beckwith and Quinn bought out Sisson and Wallace. When Beckwith and Quinn bought them out, they wrote a contract. And in that contract that was written by Beckwith and Quinn for people that they recruited to come work in the Union Pacific coal mines, they would work in the winter in the coal mine when the locomotives needed the coal to provide steam to power their locomotives. When they would work on that, when they would do that type of work for them, when they would do that work in the coal mines in the winter, they would get out and go to work in the section camps that had just as much dust. There was no grass. I interviewed a lady, when I started when I was real young, I came into Craig, Colorado, and I asked them, how do you know what's going on here? He says, ask them. Do oral histories. Talk to people that have lived here, because there's nothing written about it. Well, I would do those oral histories, and they would talk about the dust that they had all summer long. They said they had no water, and if they had water, they'd throw it out that was called gray water. You'd use drinking, washing your hands, do your dishes, you throw the gray water out, they'd throw it out on whatever was green outside. There wasn't grass to keep down the dust and stuff like that. The towns were dusty, dirty places. But we're people. We'll adjust to whatever we're given, and we'll find a way to make do. And we'll do better, and we'll try to make it better for the people that follow us to go forward. In the section camps, they were faced with a problem that sometimes they were faced with in the coal mines. They were able to work in the summer, but not in the winter. They might be able to get jobs in the coal mines, but what they were really looking for was a way to succeed. It was a way to succeed and make more money. That's what we'd all like. I like to be paid for being looked at, and I could sleep longer, but no. I'm sorry, that's what they used to kid us in. The first thing I learned about being a college kid working on a power plant was that I was the low man on the totem pole. And they used to say, do you think you're getting paid for being looked at? And I'd say, you know what, shut up. But I didn't say that to them. But I'm joking. But going back to this, we're all trying to get more money. We're all trying to improve our conditions. They wanted to live in better places. Section camps couldn't retain workers over a long period of time. What were they needed for? Well, as the train comes up over, I'm going to use the place between Piedmont. Does everybody in here, since I don't have a map on here, just imagine that Wyoming is a square, okay? And we're at the bottom part of the square, okay? And we kind of live in a square county. And this used to be this is Utah right here, by the way. And when Utah Territory was formalized in 1868, and Wyoming Territory was formalized in 1868, Utah claimed Evanston. So they thought that Evanston belonged to Utah, and that the dividing line came just to the east of us. Lo and behold, when they did the survey, they found out it was a little bit to the west, and people in Wasatch used to pay taxes to Evanston. It should be that way too, but there's nobody living there now. But going back to this, when they came into southwestern Wyoming, and they settled in this area between Aspen, that sits right here, south of here, between Aspen and between Carter, there is a broad expanse. The section camps that they built there have all disappeared. And how many of you in here have seen a section camp? They look like. They usually consist of the foreman's house, a boarding house, and houses for people that work there most of the year. The boarding houses are for people that are transient that work there either in the winter or in the summer, so that they were there for a period of time. There was no permanency or no way that you could buy property and begin to establish any kind of equity in where you were living at. So people came back to Evanston bought their houses in Evanston and put their money that they were making on the railroad in a house investment here, or they put it in Salt Lake City, or they put it in some other place where they could make the money. So the reason that they needed those particular section camps is the trains came across, they were heavy. The first rails that they had couldn't sustain the weight of the locomotives, and they would crack. Over time, they learned how to replace those tracks. For those of you that pay attention to the trains, you'll see them replacing the rails constantly, even in this day and age, because of the fact that you've got to make sure that that steel, is tested and true. So you replace the rails and you move along. Well, over time, they learned that they were going to do things to avoid the difficult things. Can anyone guess why how many of you have been to Aspen or to Piedmont? Okay, so you know what the impediment is. They put a cut through the mountain there. You don't have to go over the Three Sisters. They put a cut in the mountain there that would pack in with snow in the wintertime. So beginning in about in October, all the way until September, you had to go shovel that out. That's a good job, right? If you can get it. But you had to shovel that snow out. When it got warm, they had to come in and replace a lot of those rails because of the fact that the frost heating in the bedroom wasn't good enough. They had to replace those rails. Once that was done, they moved them off. Very rarely do you find a person staying in a section camp very long. Where they found permanency was here in Evanston, and found permanency in Almy if you were Chinese. The Chinese stopped coming in large numbers because of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, but what Union Pacific needed was people that would work for less money. So the next group of people that they recruited were Japanese. And after the Japanese, they recruited Armenians. So Union Pacific was always trying to make their rails more efficient and more competitive, and so they were constantly doing work on it. And between 1868 and 1900, they replaced most of the ties with good ties that were from elsewhere. They set in a creosote factory that would soak the ties so that there wouldn't be worms eating the ties. And they built that creosote factory inside of Laramie. You brought those ties with you, and in those ties, they were kind of poisonous. If you get a splinter from something that's creosote soaked, you usually get an infection from it. So it was a dangerous job. So the creosote that they soaked the ties, they had to replace those ties all the time, they got better at, so they didn't need as many section camps. So the section camps began to be 10 to 6 miles apart. Inside those section camps, they constantly moved the people around except for the foreman. The foreman stayed there permanently. He might have a hand that was working there. But the job of the foreman was to supervise those people that were transitory coming through, provide them with the tools and everything that they needed. And it's kind of fascinating. The interesting thing about it is the people who lived in those camps ate well. And I have joked with my students about this. They say, well, how did they eat well? They had clams, they had octopus, they had fish from the Caribbean, they had fish from China, they had fish from Sacramento, they had pike minnow, they had all these different critters that they would eat. It's because the railroad was UPS and FedEx of its time. So one advantage you got by living inside of a section camp is you could give an order to a person in a boxcar and say, hey, would you bring me a half a ham? Or would you bring me some cod? Or would you bring me some oysters? So they ate particularly well there. They were extremely well fed. In Aspen, we found out, though, that like all of us, you want to not pay so much for the meat cut that you're getting. They hunted anything that you could get. They hunted skunk, they hunted porcupine. Now, I'm not eating skunk myself. They did, they butchered the skunk, they ate porcupine, and they ate deer, they ate anything that they could get. They ate the wild game, and pretty soon you hunted all the wild game up and down beside one place. Let's see which one that is. No,
Trading Post.
Okay, so now we'll show you pictures.
Oh,
That way you see, this way, this will connect the dots a little bit better. Thank you.